Are there advantages to aging? Yes, I am Debbi-Jo Horton, and welcome to Advantages to Aging. Join my guests and I as we discuss aging and what makes for a healthy lifestyle, which results in a quality life. Thank you for joining me today. Welcome, listeners, to a new episode of Advantages to Aging. Today, I have with me a 75-year-old behavioral scientist and coach, Sharon, who does not look 75. I know you all can't see her, but the picture on the podcast definitely represents who she is and what she looks like. And Sharon really loves to help bring out the best in everyone and believes everyone has a unique golden nugget inside of them. And we're going to get to those golden nuggets. Welcome, Sharon.
Well, thank you for having me, Debbi-Jo. I think we're going to have a great time. Each podcast gets better and better, so put on your seatbelt.
I love it. I love it. Well, just kind of thinking back, we recently came out of the pandemic, although I've heard that COVID cases are starting to increase again, which kind of makes sense. We're going to be heading into the winter months. But what a lot of people really realized is that loneliness and even boredom, dare I say, and sometimes we kind of like, am I lonely or am I bored? Am I lonely and I'm bored? Like, where does that fit in this new society and this new way of life that we're trying to create?
Well, it's kind of weird that boredom and isolation really go with the pandemic, But I read the book Together by Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, and he covered a huge area of how many different ways loneliness can fit into our life. And I love this quote by Cheryl Turkle. She says, boredom is our imagination calling to us. And so much of our world is around our phone and our social media and all that. And yet there's a certain amount of interactiveness there. But boredom, when you're kids, how often are you bored as kids? There seems like there's always games and nature to explore and all that. Well, boredom really is wanting us to be curious. When you're a 3-year-old, how bored do you get?
So true.
Continually learning and exploring and having an interest in life and looking at the possibilities is just pretty amazing. I actually thought I had solved loneliness back in my early 20s. I remember Friday night that I was crocheting my ripple afghan, and this voice came in my head saying, Sharon, you ought to be out there socializing. That's what young people do on Friday nights. And wait a minute. I'm doing what I choose to do. I happen to like my own company. And so just go away and don't bother me. And I never was, one of these people that go around hunting for in the bars for somebody to have fun with. I just was satisfied. But when I read Together book, I realized that I had been feeling invisible all my career. And I actually had made a choice way back when I was like 8 or 10 years old to be invisible because it was safe. 100 times I probably said, thank heavens he keeps his hands off me. That was my dad. So I said, put your head down, focus, be obedient, and maybe you'll be safe. So it's kind of interesting that now when I read the Together book, he said feeling invisible is part of loneliness. I diverted off of boredom, but how many of us do feel invisible? I always felt like it was so important to feel heard, seen, and belong. And that wasn't much of my career. Well, in my inner spirit, I guess I knew there was something more to me. And nobody pulled it from me. Nobody seen and heard the real Sharon.
Interesting. You're right. So many times there are things inside of us, and we wait for someone else to pull it out instead of taking the courage to pull it out ourselves.
Giving it to ourselves. Oh yeah, that was a big one to me. I always wanted to feel cherished.
Yeah.
Somebody out there cherish me. Well, I can cherish myself.
Yeah, it's important to start with you. You have to love yourself before you can expect somebody else to love you. You wrote a book called Fresh Courage, and listeners, you can find a link to check that book out in the show notes. But can you tell us a little bit about what is fresh courage?
Well, I pulled that term from a movie, a Hallmark movie. If I overdose on anything, it would be a Hallmark movie. I'm not so much anymore because I'm too busy, but there's a line in, they were on a dude ranch and they said, well, when you go home from vacation, you often go home with fresh courage. And oh yeah, I mean, I'm going to grab hold of that. It was interesting. I actually asked Chat GPT recently what fresh courage was, and this kind of gave another luscious version of defining it. Fresh courage is received when such selfless acts of service and compassion are freely given. Not only does our compassionate service help another, it provides the vehicle to lift us from our own sorrow and misery. When I did podcasts here 4 or 5 years ago, to ask 8 or 10 people who can be a guest on my show to talk about courage, I was shocked at having to ask so many people to find one person to talk with me about that. So it's become huge to me that the world needs more courage.
Well, do you think that might be because sometimes we don't think that what we do is courageous?
Well, there is a certain truth to that, but I see courage often as something when we're facing a risk. The world is preaching to us about being safe, be safe, well, and go see your doctor. Every time you turn around, go see your doctor. Excuse me, I take the risk that my body is self healing. Thank you. It will heal itself. I don't need to worry about it. In fact, I kind of got this other soapbox about refusing to live my life based on fear. And
Mm.
that gives me lots of room to be courageous.
That's so true. That's so true because fear and courage cannot occupy the same space.
Yeah, and just recently I noticed some of the research I was doing that when having a certain amount of risk in our life actually is energizing.
Well, absolutely. There has to be some parts of risk in order for us to feel like we need to move. Otherwise, like, why would we get outside our comfort zone? There's got to be something that's rubbing a little bit in order for us to grow. You had mentioned in a discussion that you and I had had, you were talking about your inner spark. Can you
Mhm.
share with the listeners what the inner spark is all about? 'Cause that's really fascinating.
Oh, good. Oh, good. I'd love to. When I was taught, the first thing I was taught, in fact, in coaching school was to write an essence statement. And we had to go to class with a certain amount of homework done to prepare us for that. But I've now called it inner spark. Another term might be intrinsic motivation, what naturally motivates us to be um, giving and doing and creating. So, inner spark to me is living from your heart and the real, authentic, true version of Debbie-Jo and Sharon. That's another one of those invisible things, but what's inside is an asset. I make these little fabric art blocks, and one of my favorite line I pulled from Lion King: "Have you forgotten who you are?" And as we go through life, life has become so mundane about getting on the alarm clock and then getting in the car or the bus or the transit to go to work and then coming home from work and then maybe it's watching TV or taking the dog, but it just becomes mundane. Well, your inner spark is actually where your joy is. When you're living from what matters to you, which means we need to look at our values. What's important?
Hey, DJ here. Are you like what I used to be like, with multiple different bottles of supplements and minerals and nutrients and trying to remember when you're supposed to take what when? Gone are those days. Neora's simplified system packs active ingredients in the smallest amounts of products that you have to take, making keeping your wellness and weight management simple.
So, shortly, about 4 or 5 months after I retired, I started bouncing off the wall, and I thought, how do I know I'm productive or not? I hate wasting time. And I had made a wall hanging of my Essence Inner Spark statement. And one day I came over and read it 3 times. Oh, yeah. If I'm living from that, every day feels right because I'm living from what matters to me. So my inner spark is I am precious jewel of wisdom. I am colorful collaborator, motivator, and learner. I am tranquil, authentic, and pure inspirer. I light fires. And there's so much potential in the world that needs to be engaged. And lighting your fire is exactly what I want to do because it brings out your best.
I love that. What a great statement of your inner essence. And listeners, this is exactly who she is. So, listeners, I think that there are several things that you can be taking away from what Sharon shared. And that is, first and foremost, what are your values? If you haven't decided what those are, I think that's one of the important things that you might want to spend some time just figuring out, because from those values, you can draw upon your inner spark and maybe create a statement that you read to yourself like Sharon does. Maybe it's about making sure that the work that you're doing aligns with that inner spark, provides a way of igniting that inner spark even more, and aligns with your values. So, listeners, I hope you enjoyed listening to Sharon as much as I did. And when you want to know more, you can download some of her free gifts that you'll find in the show notes, or go right on over to Amazon and order your fresh courage today. Till next time, this is DJ Horton, your host of Advantages to Aging. Do you think one of the biggest advantages to aging is all the knowledge we gain along the way? Me too. What did you learn today? Share with me in my Facebook group with the same name as this podcast, Advantages to Aging. Now hit subscribe so you don't miss all the tips to come in future episodes.